While New Mexico Military Institute had been called the West Point of the West, and while it had been fashioned after many of the traditions and rules of Virginia Military Institute, the primary aim of New Mexico Military Institute had never been to train young men for the armed forces. There did exist, however, the conviction that young men trained in military discipline would better serve their country, whether through the discharge of their military obligation or in some other capacity as a citizen soldier. In March 1916, Roswell's own citizen soldiers, Battery A Unit of the New Mexico National Guard, were summoned to federal service with General Pershing's campaign in pursuit of Pancho Villa, who had attacked Columbus, New Mexico.
While we were there, we were at our mess and was getting ready for supper. And a bunch of firing started on. We went to our guns and come to find out, we thought it was Pancho Villa come back. And we found out it was the ammunition tent down the ways. It got a fire and they went to shooting. We were a little relieved, I'll tell you.
In December of the same year, as a result of the National Defense Act, Superintendent Wilson announced the school's entry into the program of the Reserve Officers Training Corps, the ROTC. Cadets over 16 years old were members of the Senior Infantry Unit. When the training was complete, a cadet could serve as second lieutenant in the Army for 6 months, with the prospect of a regular U.S. Army commission of first lieutenant. Superintendent Wilson announced that the first ROTC summer camp would be held in Las Vegas, New Mexico. Shortly afterwards, President Woodrow Wilson announced the U.S. was at war, in the war to end all wars, the war to make the world safe for democracy. New Mexico Military Institute contributed to the war effort in several ways. 2 days before the declaration of war, the Board of Regents had offered the services of the officers, cadets, and equipment of the Institute for organizing a voluntary military force and for drilling and equipping it. Another way was through the inventiveness of NMMI's supply officer, B.F. Leonard. Sarge Leonard, known for his marksmanship despite having only one hand, formed a unique motorcycle squad with automatic machine guns mounted on the sidecars of 4 Harley-Davidsons, each manned by 2 cadets. General Pershing adopted the idea. The greatest contribution, however, was that a large number of cadets and former cadets entered the service as commissioned officers or quickly won such commissions. The 1919 Bronco lists over 400 former cadets and faculty in the service. The class of 1914 served with special distinction, with every member, save one, entering the service as a commissioned officer. So much enthusiasm for the war effort occurred that math instructor Major Pearson attempted to cool the ardor of cadets to enlist by telling cadets it was not a disgrace to be drafted. 12 former cadets gave their lives. Institute men earned a number of honors, including the Silver Star Medal for Gallantry, the Order of the Purple Heart for wounds received in action, and the Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary heroism. Tracy Staines, junior college class of '09, received the DSC directly from President Wilson for heroism above and beyond the call of duty at the Battle of the Ardennes. Neither Roswell nor the Institute was spared the effects of the deadly epidemic of influenza, which swept the nation in the immediate post-war years. About 2/3 of the Corps was affected. Fellow cadets cared for each other day and night. Eventually, the Roswell chapter of the Red Cross sent nurses to care for the worst cases. 3 cadets died of the influenza, including the cadet son of New Mexico Governor Larrazola. 23 cadets were named for their distinguished work in caring for fellow cadets. After the war, Roswell continued to grow. It boasted 10,000 people in a town whose streets were lined with as many as 2,000 cottonwoods. New Mexico Military Institute continued to develop its physical plant. It was during this time that Kansas buff brick, in a military version of the Gothic Revival architecture by Isaac H. Rapp, was established as the dominant style on campus. Luna Natatorium, named for a former cadet who died during the war years, was raised over the existing outdoor swimming pool. A new mess hall was completed in the fall of 1918. A Carlsbad hotel operator, R.L. Bates, and his wife were employed to oversee commissary matters. During this period, the Regents determined that the Long Barracks would turn its first corner, running in an easterly direction. The school continued to acquire land and adjoining property. By 1920, New Mexico Military Institute had a physical plant estimated to be worth $750,000. Under the leadership of Superintendent Wilson and Commandant Saunders, two cornerstones of the Institute were laid: the Blue Book and the Honor System. The first Blue Book of 1920 was 26 pages long and included such rules as cadets must bathe at least 3 times weekly. Expulsion was the penalty for fighting a cadet officer over a report. No permission to go to the sinks, the toilet, or any other place during the 2-hour night study hall. Classroom seating chairs were made, and cadets were to stand at attention until the officer commanded, "Seat." The honor system, a code drawn up by Superintendent Wilson, stipulated everyone in the school should be put on his word of honor to refrain from physical hazing, cheating, stealing, and lying, to live by the code. The cavalry brought other changes to the military department. Horses brought horse shows, and the Institute acquired 10 thoroughbreds. Polo gained recognition as a major sport in 1924. One mare, a prize mount belonging to Major Saunders, became the victim of a suspected cadet prank. The mare was in a stall awaiting service from a worthy stallion, which would provide a new polo pony for the commandant's string. When the blessed event occurred, the new product was something quite unexpected: a beautiful, long-eared mule. Several cadets were questioned about this dastardly deed of miscegenation, but all claimed complete innocence. During the 30s, Will Rogers' son played polo for the Institute. He took a deep interest in the team and once even underwrote the expenses of one Western trip. His dad, Will Rogers, earned an honorary alumnus status at NMMI and once, while visiting his son, played a chukker of polo on a borrowed horse. Will stated that he thought that horse was pretty smart, but wondered whether it could run as fast as he. In the fall of 1924, enrollment grew, and the regiment was increased from 4 to 6 troops, plus headquarters. As baseball became less popular, due in part to the Black Sox Scandal of 1919, basketball began to gain the limelight. But the really popular sport was football. So popular that the Bronco team went through preseason training in the Sacramento Mountains. The team was made up of college and high school students. The first winning season since before World War I happened in 1924, when the school won its first Southwest championship. And by the early 30s, NMMI was in one of its greatest football eras. Track, tennis, sponsored by Paul Horgan, swimming, and even golf had numerous enthusiasts. Boxing came to school in 1929. Around that time, school teams divided into Broncos for college and Colts for high school students. The regents even appropriated $2,250 for the purchase of a 29-horsepower white motor bus to transport NMMI athletes to various meets. For fun, the Cotillion Club sponsored cadet dances, and cadets made field trips to Carlsbad Caverns. An honor society was begun in 1933. The Prince of Wales Club replaced the stable honor society with its role displayed in the Post Exchange, where victims of mean horses might inscribe their names, the horses' names, and an alibi for being unseated. Several other landmarks happened during these years. In 1919, the governor appointed to the Board of Regents the first Hispanic members, and in 1921, the first woman. In 1922, James W. Wilson died, the person who had at that time most shaped New Mexico Military Institute. As was the custom, family, friends, and cadets accompanied the body to its resting place as the band played funeral dirges. At the end of the service, the bandmaster, Captain Jack Fletcher, known as Captain Jack, gave the command, "About face." With that command, light, airy tunes, beginning with "The Old Gray Mare, She Ain't What She Used to Be," were played as the band made its way back to the Institute, many of its members with tears running down their faces. When asked the reason for this unusual procedure, Captain Jack stated he was trying to give cadets the message that when the funeral ceremony was over, life must go on. To him, the old gray mare was symbolic of the necessity to carry on. The regents then appointed a Harvard graduate, J.C. Troutman, a Northerner for the first time, as superintendent. Under his administration, enrollment took a striking increase. In Troutman's first year, 1922, enrollment was 221. By 1925, it was 455. Students from 30 states attended. To care for the growing student body, Hagerman Barracks was finally expanded to look like the box. At this time, the school's landmark architectural piece was constructed, the Sallyport. During the 20s, Paul Horgan returned to the Institute as cadet and publicity man. Faculty member Maurice Fulton, a graduate of the University of Mississippi, also arrived to teach English, called Old Baggy Pants by cadets when they were safely in their barracks. Both men would bring great honor to NMMI because of their scholarly writing. By 1928, cadets boasted that NMMI was the only military school with an enrollment of under 600 in the United States with 3 publications, edited and managed by students: the Bronco Yearbook, the Pup Tent newspaper, and the Maverick literary magazine. Dramatics reached a peak during this time, with Mrs. H.P. Saunders and Paul Horgan making this a fun, worthwhile activity. Thanks to the talent of John Darling, who wrote the music, and Paul Horgan, who wrote the lyrics to Old Post, it was during this era at the Institute that cadets could finally sing their own alma mater. When Superintendent Troutman resigned in 1926, the Board of Regents then selected Superintendent D. Cecil Pearson. The Roswell Daily Record enthusiastically endorsed this appointment, declaring that without the Institute, Roswell would be scarcely more than a way station on the Santa Fe Railroad. By then, Roswell had grown to over 12,000 residents, and the Chamber of Commerce claimed 275 blocks of paved streets. Cotton had replaced apples as the key crop. Despite the National Depression, NMMI continued expanding its physical plant, with the superintendent's home and adjutant's home, both of brick, and the J. Ross Thomas building to replace the old PX. Dedicated in October 1933, JRT, as it was called, housed a lounge, barber shop, post office, refreshment room on the first floor, billiard rooms in the basement, and extra bedrooms on the second floor. Added to the campus in the 30s were a football field, a fountain with a Bronco statue, new tablet chairs for Lee Hall, iron gates for the 17th Street entrance, and the beginning of a golf course. More land was purchased, including a 20-acre tract adjacent to the stables. Economics dominated American interests more than politics during the 20s and 30s in American life. Technology, especially the automobile, changed the American lifestyle. Although petroleum and natural gas were beginning to emerge as valuable assets, New Mexico did not benefit greatly from the economic upturn of the 20s. But being neither urban nor industrialized, it also did not suffer greatly from the Depression. After 1930, even cadets started asking questions about the work that bald, thin man was doing in his workshop about a mile from the Institute on Mescalero Road, firing peculiar projectiles into the clear New Mexico sky. Dr. Robert Goddard was his name. Little did anyone really know what effect Goddard's projectiles would have upon the world. Little could anyone know what the decade of the 40s would demand of individuals as cadets, as a school, as a nation.